Hi Craig, it's great to have the opportunity to chat with you today. Just to give the audience some background information on you, you've played Premier League cricket for 10 years before going into full-time coaching. You're head coach at Berea Rovers Cricket Club and Chatsworth Sporting Cricket Club here in South Africa. You're also head coach at North Down Cricket Club in Northern Ireland and currently head coach at RHC Cricket Club in Scotland. You're also coaching at the Elite Cricket Academy here in Durban. Your previous coaching involvement within schools is at DPHS, Clifton College, Northwood School, DHS. And in addition, you've been involved with Dolphins Academy as a work experience opportunity and have also worked individually with many players from overseas as well as in women's cricket. When did you start playing cricket?
I think for me it started pretty much as I could walk. My older brother played cricket his whole life, played provincial cricket, so going down and watching him with my dad kind of just naturally got involved in the game.
And what got you hooked on the sport?
I think I just loved the game in general. I loved the competitiveness. I loved the sort of the skill aspect about it, and you know, as a youngster, just growing up and having a good team sport, I just fell in love with the game.
And when you talk about competitiveness, what do you actually mean about that?
Just the battle between bat and ball. You know, I was fortunate enough to be able to be good enough to bowl and bat. You know, so I got the advantage of being able to sort of have that fierce fast bowlers battle. Not that I was the quickest, but fast bowler on the batsman, get in their faces, but then also have the reverse on me and getting stuck in as a batter with the bowlers, you know, and that sort of that competition between bat and ball always kept me going.
And when you mean get in their faces, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I suppose as a fast bowler, you know, you get fired up at times, especially when it's a tough contest, good batsman on the other end. You know, it's you're finding things are tough, maybe it's a flat surface, and sometimes you just got to sort of egg yourself up and keep yourself going in that competition by just maybe, you know, having a word or two with the batter, maybe getting up and close after your follow through, and you know, just trying to see if you can play a couple of mind games with the guys that are batting, just to keep yourself on top of the competition.
And you've enjoyed this longevity in your sport in terms of starting young and you continuing to play, and even, you know, you're able to coach overseas. How have you kept that motivation going?
I think for me the main thing is just continuing to enjoy the sport, irrespective of my involvement in it. And I found a lot of, you know, enjoyment, a lot of passion in the coaching side, just watching guys develop. And I think that's when I started coaching. I never really saw a lot of that with the youngsters because of how long it takes them to develop. But when I started working a lot more with the teenager guys and I saw their mentality, and as they grew, you could see a little bit more acceleration in their development as they got from under 15 to under 17. And just that development sort of just sparked that enjoyment and passion for me. And so on the coaching side of things, that's really what kept me going in my coaching.
Now I find personally, especially in my earlier years, you sometimes battle to enjoy the sport. When was that moment where you really moved from, you know, just playing for the, you know, either someone was forcing you to play and then moving to enjoyment? Where was that pivotal moment?
I don't think I really had that sort of problem, especially a little bit from when I went from playing into coaching, because I had an early transition into coaching. But I think for me, when I realized I was happy not to play anymore, coaching then became a lot more enjoyable.
So you're almost giving back to...
Yeah. So for me, on a playing perspective, I never felt I had to be forced to play or forced to train because I wanted to be there. To the point where on the odd occasion, you know, I would miss a class to actually go do that extra training at school. We had an indoor facility and we were allowed to actually, during school, to miss a lesson to go do an extra hour before training. So it got to that point where for me, I never had that issue during sort of my playing time, but definitely during my coaching time was that a little bit of a tough transition, and sort of I tried the player coach role, and that was really tough. But once I realized I was happy I accepted the fact that I was happy not to play anymore. The coaching became a lot more enjoyable.
What is your favorite format of cricket?
I'm a purist. Test match cricket is up there for me with the best format. I enjoy the other formats. T20 cricket is always a fun one to play. I've actually been very successful coaching wise in T20 cricket. But to sit and watch test match cricket, I could watch ball one to the last ball of each day.
True. And just for us novices out there who don't understand the differences between the T20 and the Test cricket, you just provide some insight on what those differences are in terms of format, and also how they are different for the actual player.
So obviously Test match cricket is your 5-day format. Obviously if you're playing provincial cricket, it's 4-day cricket. And then your World Cup cricket, your 50 over cricket, that's 50 overs, and then obviously your T20 cricket, you're playing your 20 overs, so your RPLs, your big sort of T20 tournaments around the world, your BBLs, your Caribbean Premier Leagues. Those are the ones that really draw in the big cash and the big investors, and that's where all the entertainment is at the moment. Test match cricket for me is the one that really tests your skills over a long period. It really sort of tests not only fitness, mentality, your skills, but it just tests your physical capacity as well.
Because you're out there a long time,
Yeah.
and you obviously have the ups and downs, so you've got to stay mentally strong.
Oh yes, and it can change session by session. You're generally you get 3 sessions in a day, and you could be on top for one session, and the next session you're well behind the game. And it just changes from day to day. It can change, and that's what brings the excitement. You never know what can happen on the day, depending on how the pitch deteriorates. It could be a bowler's day on one day, it could be a batsman's day on one day. And that's the excitement for me, especially with Test match cricket. 50 over cricket, I think you still get the enjoyment out of that, and I think T20 cricket's made 50 over cricket a lot more exciting. You're seeing a lot more scores over 300 now. Batsmen are taking a lot more risks, but it's also, for them, it's not outside of their game plan. So you're seeing a lot more attacking cricket for a lot longer period in 50 over cricket, which I think has also helped spark sort of a resurgence of 50 over cricket. You look recently with Australia and India, Australia regularly scoring 380, 390 in 50 over cricket, which was unheard of 10, 15 years ago.
And is there a different way to coach the cricketers, youth cricket, in terms of these 2 different formats?
I think youth cricket, you don't really want to start coaching them to play different formats too early. I think you want them to focus mainly on the fundamentals of the game for as long as possible. And then as they start to develop and get into more their teens, the under 15s and the 17s, then you can start looking at generating more individual skills towards different formats. I think if you can get them, sort of start them too early, sometimes they can get a bit confused how they want to go about their game. So I'm a very big believer in coaching the very basics and the fundamentals of the game until those are mastered. Once you've got those, then you can actually start learning to apply them in the different formats.
What is your favorite moment from a cricket match?
I think for me, it goes back to that 4-3-8 game. I was funny playing cricket at the time, and we came off at lunch, and we saw Australia had scored 434, and we thought there's no chance. They're not very optimistic, but seeing that score for the first time, it's hard to see a side chasing that down. But then coming off at the end of the game and seeing we needed, I think it was like 10 off the last over or so, it was all of a sudden everyone was in the clubhouse. We were all watching.
It was possible.
It just we didn't realize the possibility of it, and then you got in, you realized we're there. And for me, that was a really one of the biggest moments for me in cricket.
Do you think you can coach that type of resilient behavior where youth cricketers are behind, and you're almost instilling them that resilient attitude to overcome?
I think you can, and I think it's a learned process. So it's not something that happens naturally for a lot of players. I think it can be learned, it can be taught, but for it to be naturally, instilled in someone, I think it's a very rare thing. And for me, it's putting those people in those situations as often as possible, and that can help accelerate that resilience and that that want to persevere irrespective of the situation.
So you're almost you're creating a situation where you're trying to duplicate what you're going to do in that cricket match.
100%. I think a perfect example of someone who's got that sort of natural perseverance and resilience irrespective of the situation is Virat Kohli. One of the best guys when it comes to batting second and chasing down totals. I don't think he ever believes there's a total he can't chase down. And that's one of the guys I feel who are naturally gifted at having that mindset. But the more someone plays in that mindset, the more they actually succeed in that sort of environment and that challenge. The easier it will become every time they actually go out there and actually have that challenge set for them.
Now, who's your favorite player and why?
Growing up and seeing a lot of the guys like Brian Lara, Sachin Tendulkar, Ponting, I grew up in sort of that era. But for me, growing up, Jacques Kallis was always the best of the best for me, being able to relate being a batter, a bowler.
I'm glad you said a South African.
Yeah, I think at the moment I can't help but say Steve Smith for me is one of the great guys. I feel like I can watch him no matter what format he's playing. I think he's, in terms of Test match cricket, probably the best batsman in the world. I think Virat Kohli, in terms of all formats, is very hard to beat. But growing up watching Jacques Kallis bat, and then understand, I wish he had got 300 Test wickets. It would have just been a milestone. It would have been so nice to have seen. But yeah, Jacques Kallis, just in terms of his all-round ability and being able to convert that into all formats as well, which is a great guy to watch.
Now, have you had any major injuries due to cricket?
I had a back injury, which kind of was one of the reasons why I transitioned into coaching fairly early. It didn't stop me from playing for the first couple of years. It just sort of, I had to be a little bit more limited in what I did. So I sort of stopped bowling and just focused on batting. So I played mainly as a batter for 2 or 3 seasons after that, and then transitioned out of playing cricket seriously and focused a lot on coaching.
Do you think that injury was preventable?
Oh yes, definitely. I think for me, I needed to take my training a bit more seriously in terms of off-field training. But sometimes it just catches you. I was not feeling any issues, just bowled one game, came off, and just never came right. And purely I think because when I realized that I was happy to transition into coaching, I was already doing a small transition anyway. I think it just accelerated, but it didn't stop me from playing. It just stopped me from sort of pursuing cricket sort of for the next couple of years. I didn't do it as seriously as I wanted to.
Now, with other sports, and in particular my sport, you know, to prevent injury, you do your warm up, you do your stretching, and often you go to physio maybe every now and again just to prevent. What sort of advice could you give to youth coaches in terms of how they could impart, preventable measures to stop injuries?
I think it comes down to just educating the player. So you as a coach need to get educated on how to best, look after your player. Obviously, as a coach, you can only have so much information. But if you do, luckily enough, have qualifications in a sporting background, it does help. But I think it's just trying to be as educated as possible on how to look after your players the best you can, and then imparting that knowledge onto them. And then in the end, it's up to the player itself to take care of his recovery, take care of his training. Obviously, if you're in a professional background, it's a lot easier because you have those people around you and you have a lot more of them to actually look after you. But it all still comes down to the player.
Now, how important is fitness for a cricket player?
In this day and age, it's vitally important. I think in the past you could get away with it a bit more, but I think today with the amount of cricket that's being played, having 3 formats now, I think it's vitally important that the cricketer has a good level of fitness and even a better recovery program.
What should a standard training week include?
I think it depends on the level of cricket you're playing. But I think if you're looking to play at the top level, it's vitally important that you're doing your at least 3 to 4 days of gym work. And I think you should be getting at least 3 to 4 days of cricket training in as well. I know the professionals are getting up to 4 to 5 days of both. but then adding in a good recovery. I'm very
Big believer in recovery.
yeah, big believer in your recovery. You can train all you want, but if you're not recovering properly, you're not looking after yourself after you train, you're going to actually have more issues down the line.
Now, what is a good measure of fitness for a cricket player?
I think it's a tough one, because it depends on your involvement in the game. Obviously, having a good level of cardio fitness is just a good standard platform. But depending on how you're involved in the game depends on how your fitness needs to be.
Cricket is a complex game with batting, bowling and fielding. How should one structure training?
Once again, I think if you're looking at a coach's perspective, you've got to look at the makeup of your side, and then target individual training as well with team training. For me, if you're looking at a very sort of amateur setup, club setup, you'll have your two trainings a week before you'll have your game. And then you just split it up in terms of time-wise. If you've got a 2-hour session, you maybe do an hour and a half batting and bowling, and then you'll finish off with some fielding. Sometimes you can start with about half an hour of fielding and then move into batting and bowling. It all depends on also your facilities. So I think that's all sort of, for me, understanding what you have to work with, understanding your team, and then what you feel is going to work best for your training session.
Skills are a major part of cricket. Can you elaborate on the importance of skills?
I think if you don't have the skills to sort of play the game, you're never going to develop and get actually higher in your sports. I think it works for all sports. Cricket being quite a diverse sort of skill range. If you're an all-rounder and you got, let's say, you're batting in the middle order, you've got to have a different skill set to if you're opening the batting. If you're a middle overs bowler and a death bowler, you've got to have a different skill set to actually being an opening bowler. So, and the same with spin. So it depends on your discipline within the sport, depends on actually how you work your skills, but you can never develop your skills enough, and you can never learn a new skill. So for me, it's vitally important to actually understand what skill set you require and then develop those as you need.
Now, for a youth coach, how do they place the order of batsmen? Is it the best first and the worst last, or?
And as a youth coach, you sort of go, especially as you're getting into coaching, you go on what you've always sort of seen and known while playing cricket. But as you sort of get more into coaching, you realize, you're allowed to sort of test a few things out. For me, a batting order, I always go, what are my top 3? 4 to 7, and then obviously looking at my bowlers and maybe my all-rounders. So I'll look at it in that, and also depending on what skill set I have with the batters, and then put their skill set according to where they're best fit in the batting order.
Hand-eye coordination is an imperative skill for cricket players. What drills are effective for fielding?
Fielding is all specific. I think depending on where you want your fielders to field, depends on how they go about their training and their hand-eye coordination. You can do very basic hand-eye coordination, especially with the youths. That actually isn't related to fielding at all, just simple basic hand-eye drills that actually will impart skills on all aspects. But I think when it comes to fielding, I think it's as specific as possible. If you're fielding on the boundary, most often than not in a game, you want to do more boundary fielding. And then just your general catching with high catches, flat catches, diving catches. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are on the field, those are all important.
What is your perspective on tactics in cricket?
It's important, but also they need to be flexible. Cricket can change literally in the space of 2 to 3 balls, so you've got to be able to adapt your tactics according to what's happening in the current situation. So you can talk about what you want to do off the field before the game with your bowlers, with your batters, but once you get to the game, that could all quickly change in the space of a couple of balls. It could change in the space of the surface and what you expected it to be. Rain could come. So tactics are important, but must be flexible and adaptable to the situation that you find yourself in.
When did you realize you wanted to become a coach?
Starting coaching, I started in 2007, my first year out of school, but I was still pursuing cricket as a player. But I think once I sort of got to 2012, I had my injury, and that's when I realized maybe actually let me try and look at coaching a bit more seriously. and that's when I started to transition into coaching. And then when I got my first assistant position at Berea Rovers, was really when it sort of started sparking a lot of interest in senior coaching. So
And what is challenging about being a coach?
managing all the different aspects of the game, because you're not just focusing on one thing, you're focusing on about 45 different things, and you got to be as organized as possible to be able to manage those things, plus your squad. And in your squad, everyone requires something different from you, and I think it's first of all finding that out, and that's the most challenging part, because some guys you'll find out straight away, some guys you've got to just keep going until you figure it out. So I think just trying to manage all the different aspects of the game on and off the field, and then trying to understand your players as best as you can.
Have you ever had any difficult situations with, the players you coach, and what did you do to resolve it?
Yeah, I think over the years you're going to have issues with players. Players aren't happy with maybe what you want from them, or players are very sort of down and out of their performances, and you're trying to get them out of that mindset where you know they're capable of doing the job, but it's just trying to draw them out of that sort of mind space. And then obviously clashes within players. I've had one or two guys where we've clashed within a team that you've got to sort out. So I had an issue with a game where we had two players that were batting together, and then they went out consecutively, and one sort of blamed the other for why they got out. And it just sort of spewed off into off the field stuff. So it was very hard to sort that out sort of at the moment, but I knew if I sort of took my mind off the game to sort that out, it wouldn't be best for the team, because there was still two guys out in the middle. We had to sort of focus there. So for me, it was letting them sort it out on their own, which was very hard to do, because it made me look like I wasn't actually interested in trying to sort that situation out, but knowing the fact that if I did, it would have been more of a detriment to the side for the current situation of the game. So I let the guys sort it out. I told them just to walk it out on the field, and they came back, they'd cooled down a bit. But that was like one of the situations where I found quite challenging, because it was, do I take my mind off the game to sort this out, or do I keep my mind in the game and make sure the players are staying focused and let the players sort it out, be mature to sort it out themselves? So on a senior perspective, I think that you'll have a lot more of, and in the youth not so much, because I think they're more upset with themselves and their teammates, and it's just trying to say, okay, cool, it's all right, and you just keep them sort of motivated and say it's okay to not perform. But as you get more higher, there's a lot more complications, a lot more sort of intricate things that can happen, so you just got to manage those as best as you can.
In your opinion, what makes a great coach?
Understanding of your players. I think if you can't understand your players and what they need from you and what you want from them, it's going to be a very difficult time. So for me, understanding and communicating with the players is probably the most important aspect. And in doing so, that also means you're not going to come diving into a new situation. So for me, if you're going to a new team, you're not going guns blazing, and you're going, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, with actually understanding the environment, understanding the players. So for me, understanding and actually communicating with your players is vitally important for a coach.
And coaching a cricket team, in my opinion, is highly complex. Do you have team building exercises, or how do you get that team unity going? Is there some sort of practical?
I think developing that also comes down to the environment you're in. For me, you're not going to come in and start doing a certain team build when the culture of the side doesn't require that. So it all depends on, like I said, understanding your situation of your side, understanding the players, and then looking at what would be best suited for that group of players to help build them up. For example, if a side's not requiring good unity, because they already have good unity, you may want to do something that's going to challenge them in, maybe they have an issue with communication. So you want to do a team building around communication rather than unity, because they actually all get along pretty well, but they struggle to communicate both on and off the field when it comes to maybe if they're a little bit frustrated about something. So maybe you'll need to look at that. So it all comes down to what the team requires, and then putting in the different sort of plugins that will help with that.
Let me give you a scenario. I'm 18 years old and want to become a cricket coach. What do I need to do?
I think the first thing is actually getting your coaching levels.
Where do you get those from?
You can get them down at the unions. So wherever you are based around the world, everyone's got their own union that run their coaching levels. Everyone's got their own way of doing it. But going to do your level 1 or your beginner's level, depending on the country you're in, is always a good starter, because it gives you a big base of knowledge around the basics of cricket. And then getting involved with your local school or club is always a good way to start. I know overseas in England and Australia and stuff, their clubs are very strong there, so getting involved with one of the clubs, and then obviously in South Africa it's probably easiest getting involved with a school. Primary schools, high schools, always looking for coaches for cricket.
What practical steps could you recommend for aspiring cricket coaches?
I think finding yourself a mentor. I think once you've got your levels, you've got the knowledge, but then it's learning how to apply them correctly and how to apply them most effectively. And the best way to do that is actually finding someone who's been in the business for a while, and actually going and actually being an understudy, learning how.
Yeah, first-hand knowledge.
100%.
Hearing it.
I was reading a book by Robert Greene, Concise Mastery, and he talks about the apprentice phase. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to actually go to the Dolphins Academy and work under the academy coach at the time, Yash, who actually I've known for a very long time. He's obviously now with Clifton College as their first team cricket coach. But he's coached the Dolphins, he's a level 4 coach, and I wanted to sort of see how he went about things. And it was sort of still in that transitioning phase for me, where I was learning a lot more about coaching. And that really helped accelerate my knowledge and my application of the knowledge. And I would say about 18 months later, I got my first gig overseas, and with that knowledge actually helped me to succeed in that environment overseas.
What can cricket coaches do to upskill or develop themselves?
I think, first of all, just going back to what I said before, having that mentor, and then just trying to do as much as you can to educate yourself on stuff outside of the game of cricket. So, you can learn as much as you want about the basics of batting, fundamentals of batting, but in the end, learning more about dealing with players, understanding the game in terms of how it's played a bit more, and that can only come with actually being involved in those situations and trying to challenge yourself with higher levels, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. But it comes down to having a mentor and actually being able to ask questions of him giving you sort of situations that you can go and try out, and then going back to him with more questions. And for me, that's having a mentor and having someone you can actually talk to is very important. And then what I like to do a lot is educate myself around how the mind works, how the body works, and just look to apply that as best as I can in terms of how cricket is played.
You're right. Getting that competitive edge can mean the difference between success and failure. Now let's move this conversation to playing cricket overseas. You played cricket in India and Northern Ireland. What have you learned from playing cricket overseas?
So fortunately, I'll go to Northern Ireland to start with. I went there as a head coach. I ended up playing a couple of games, which was very nice. Playing under different conditions. Surfaces were a little bit more soft when you're playing outside of our home ground. I was very fortunate. Our home ground was probably one of the best wickets in Ireland and Northern Ireland combined. All the guys wanted to go there and play. But the biggest, I think, the challenge for me would have been just playing in the cold. Actually understanding that, it doesn't get very warm, even though you probably get about 3 or 4 days of really hot weather in June, July. But outside of that, you're playing cricket in 10 to 15 degree weather most of the time. So I think it's just getting used to the cold and actually playing through that. And then playing in India, I was actually fortunate enough at the end of my matric year to go spend a couple of weeks playing in India. Surfaces were really tough. We played a couple of good schools there. Funny enough, I actually played against Virat Kohli in one of the games when he was at Delhi Public School. So that was a great experience. Didn't even know who he was at the time, and then pitched up on RPL the first year. But I think the best thing I learned about India is actually learning to play spin correctly. I couldn't play spin to save my life, but I never really needed to over here in our conditions. You had spinners, but it wasn't tracks that were conducive to spin. So going there, I do very well with the seamers, and then literally after about 10 overs, spin would come on. You'd have spin for 30 overs.
Wow.
So it was very, very difficult to actually learn to play that. I wouldn't last long, but what I did was I asked questions. I spoke to the opposition team coaches, I spoke to the players, And even though they were quite young themselves, 16, 17, they had such an in-depth knowledge on how they played spin. And coming back here and just trying to develop those skills back here in our conditions accelerated that sort of learning for me. So playing overseas is so sort of important for your development, because you're playing in conditions you'll never play on, and you actually come back a better player just due to the fact that you're challenging yourself in a new environment, and then you're learning how to apply those different skills back home when you come back.
Can you just elaborate, just on a layman's terms, when you different surfaces? Because I'm not an expert in cricket myself, and you're obviously an advanced level. Can you just provide some content on that?
Yeah, so you always want a good flat track. So a flat track was when the ball doesn't do much off the surface. It comes on quite nicely. It's a quick surface, consistent bounce. So it's not sort of bouncing high and then bouncing low. You know, and that's pretty much your best surface to bat on. That's where you really want to capitalize the batsman or score your runs. You get a lot of those surfaces here in South Africa where it's good bounce, hard tracks, ball comes onto the bat quite nicely. And then you'll get your drier sort of surfaces where it's more sort of conducive to spin bowling, where the ball's going to turn a lot more, it's going to hold up in the surface. Maybe your bowlers then will want to bowl sort of different variations of deliveries. So they'll roll their fingers over the ball almost like bowling cutters. And those are the surfaces you find a lot more in your subcontinent, so your India, Sri Lanka, you know, Pakistan areas. Funny enough, even with those surfaces, Pakistan produce still some of the best seam bowlers in the world, which is fantastic to see. So it also proves it doesn't matter the surfaces you play on. You can still go out and be a bowler that isn't conducive in the surfaces back home. So yeah, and then you've got England, who are very sort of used to a little bit of a softer surface, but very conducive to swing, so the ball moves a lot more in the air. So they've got very good swing bowlers up there in the UK. And even down in New Zealand, very similar sort of surfaces, very good swing bowlers. So yeah, I think that's the best way I can describe the different playing surfaces.
How does overseas cricket differ from local cricket?
I don't think it differs too much, to be honest. I think the game is pretty much played the same way. I think the only difference is the way you play the game on the surface that's provided. But I think it's not played too much different. I think training's very much the same. You know, it just depends on the facilities each place has. But in terms of playing, I don't think it's too much different. It's just adapted to the surfaces you play on.
What is the most challenging aspect of playing overseas?
I think getting used to the cold, and then especially if you're playing in the UK, the surfaces are a bit more softer. So I think it's just getting used to understanding how to bat on those surfaces and to bowl on those surfaces as well. But yeah, I think the toughest condition for me would be learning to play in the cold, especially if you're from South Africa or even in Australia.
Cricket is a team sport, but often you're judged by your individual record. How do you manage these two aspects?
I've always said cricket's the most individualistic sport played in a team environment. But what I say to the guys is your contribution as an individual affects the team. So that's sort of how I get their mindset to work as a team. So for me, getting them to understand your contribution affects the team. So if you're putting runs on the board for yourself, you're putting runs on the board for your team. If you're taking wickets as a bowler, it's taking wickets for the team. So even though your individual performance is vital, but it's also vital for the team. So if no one performs individually, it's very hard to actually have a good team performance.
As cricket has become more and more professional, do you feel the physical aspect has become more challenging and competitive in order to remain at the top of the game?
Yeah, I agree with that. That's actually something I've realized a lot more as more formats have become, you know, a lot more regular, a lot more T20 tournaments around the world, a lot more players are playing a lot more cricket. Recently you've seen guys like Steve Smith and David Warner actually saying they're not going to play Big Bash because of international cricket and it's just too much time, they want time with the family. I think there's a lot more cricket being played around the world. Even, you know, I think a lot of the guys enjoyed the break over this sort of period we have with the pandemic. So a lot of guys have had some good breaks. But yeah, with a lot more cricket being played now, a lot more T20 tournaments, a lot more guys leaving to play in the T20 tournaments, then coming back, international cricket, no international cricket, provincial cricket. Guys have to be as physically prepared as possible, and actually to keep the competitive edge, they've got to be as strong in their mindsets to actually be able to sort of regenerate and actually keep themselves fresh. I think that's extremely important, keeping themselves fresh mentally.
What did you learn from the failures, if they can be called failures?
I think for me you fail positively. If you're looking at failure as a negative thing, you're never actually going to learn. I was actually having a conversation with a cricketer yesterday about how every time he did something he didn't like, his focus was purely on that, and actually not on working onto the next ball or to the sort of the next situation. But I always like to fail positively. So whatever it is that doesn't go my way or doesn't go right, I look at it, I reflect on it, and I go, okay, what could I have done better, or how could I have not put myself in that situation? But I'm happy to fail as regularly as possible, because it means I'm testing stuff, I'm trying stuff, I'm learning what doesn't work, and I'm also learning what does work. So for me, you got to fail as often as possible. Put yourself in a situation where it's so challenging, you know you may fail, but you're not worried about that.
I think it's a good philosophy to have, because it encourages you to take risks and do things that you perhaps wouldn't have done, and that relates to your experiences overseas. Now, who has inspired you the most?
I think inspiration started with my older brother. I think the way he went about the game and the way he played the game for me was always keeping himself in the competitive edge. He was a very big, strong, fast bowler. Hurt a lot of players in his day, but I just liked his competitive edge. Even now, up until the age of 50, he was still playing cricket. So I think early on, for me, he inspired me to continue to play the game. And then going into coaching, I think it's just the game itself just kept me going. The love of the game just kept my inspiration for actually wanting to develop players. So for me, my dad, my older brother, just kept me going with playing, got me into it, and actually inspired me to actually want to play the game.
Yeah, I think family support definitely has a major influence on outcomes. Now, what advice can you give to youth?
I think if you're looking on a playing perspective, try and enjoy the game as much as you can, because the minute you stop enjoying the game, it's going to be very hard to want to play, to want to train. So just find the enjoyment aspects within the game, and try and sort of get that every single time you play. Try and understand what that is for you, because it's different for everyone. Some people want that competitive edge to enjoy the game. Some people just enjoy it because they're playing. They're around their friends, they're around the social aspect. Some guys, they find the enjoyment because they want to see how far they can go. But for me, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, if you're not enjoying the game, you're never actually going to play it for a long period of time. You're not going to be able to actually transition to other aspects of the game, and you're never actually going to develop as a player. So just, for me, having the enjoyment is the biggest advice I can give. And then once you've got that, then you can focus on training hard, and actually, because if you've got that enjoyment, you're going to want to train, you're going to want to stay motivated to actually train.
Craig, it was great chatting to you today. I gained a lot of insight into cricket, and I think for our viewers out there who perhaps want to get involved in cricket, they can see the opportunities that it's created for you in terms of overseas travel, in terms of experiences, and even in terms of a job. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.